Welcome back to this second segment of Our View, a show about poverty as it relates to Battle Creek, Michigan. In this segment, we're continuing the discussion about domestic violence and how it relates to poverty. Joining me is Michelle Richardson, Women's Co-op Board Member and Special Assistant Attorney General to the state of Michigan, working for Calhoun County on sexual assault cold cases. That was a mouthful.
It is a mouthful.
Welcome, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Teresa.
The myth that we're discussing is, does domestic violence happen more in poverty? In your personal experience, what's your opinion about this myth?
I can understand why people may think that that's true, but there is absolutely no connection between domestic violence, the causes of domestic violence and poverty. What is true about poverty's linked to domestic violence is that domestic violence often increases a woman's likelihood of becoming somebody who is dealing with poverty.
Thank you. You know, another factor in all this, and I don't think that we talked about it in our first segment too much, that domestic violence is not always physical. For example, the wife of the DC sniper, Mildred Muhammad, I think, yeah.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about what is that like for victims of domestic violence? Like, this is a control issue, but it's not a violence issue.
Well, I had the pleasure of listening to Mildred Muhammad speak about her experiences with John Allen Muhammad, who's known as the DC sniper. When she spoke about him, it really opened my eyes to the sheer terror that somebody can go through and the fear that somebody can live with on a daily basis that the person in their life would kill them. And never once did this man lay a hand on her. I think that it is common for people who work in the world of domestic violence to hear about the power and control wheel. And that wheel talks a lot about the controlling environment that domestic violence offenders create. And rather than the term "they just snapped" or "this isn't how he normally is," this is a very planned environment. This is a very planned situation on a regular basis, and that is information that they've gotten through studying offenders who have gone through offender counseling programs. What Muhammad did to his wife is, despite the fact that at some point she was the only one working, he controlled every aspect of how that money was spent. He allowed her an allowance, which again is one of those economic control factors on the power and control wheel, of $200 a month for their grocery bills. And if she spent over $205, she had to supply him with receipts every single time, where that eventually became every time she left the house, she had to prove exactly where she was, how long she was at each location, and how much money was spent, and provide proof of that to him whenever he requested it. But another thing that he would do is he would control her environment by taking away everything she cared about. So she would go and buy dishes so that they could have company over for dinner. And at that time, they just had one of their three children, and he was not eating on regular plates yet. So while she would buy a set of plates, he would destroy all but two of them. They were limited to one plate, one saucer, one bowl, one knife, one fork, one spoon.
So there couldn't be company.
So there couldn't be company. And she would replace that, and he would continually destroy that until she finally said, "Why do you destroy these things?" And he said, "Because we don't need any more than this. This is all we need." And she started to learn she couldn't comment on liking anything. She had a favorite clock, and one day she commented how much she really liked that clock before she went to work. When he came home, or when she came home, he had taken it all apart, and it was all across the kitchen table in pieces. And she asked what happened, and his explanation was that he had taken it apart because it wasn't working correctly. But in reality, he was just getting rid of everything that she wanted.
Something that she cared about.
Yeah, and things got worse between them for a long time. And at night, when she would fall asleep, or at least he believed her to be asleep, he would whisper in her ear, "I will take you out with one shot." Eventually, she decided she needed to leave that marriage, and that was in July of 1999. And she advised him of that, and he said, "I will take everything that you care about away." And she feared greatly, but she could not get anything together because she couldn't prove she was a victim of domestic violence. And one of the things that he did, which is very common, is that he was out in the community. And everybody knew him in the community, but he did not permit her to go out in the community. And he was a man of his word. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. And she will repeatedly talk about how when she would mention to other people her concerns that he was going to kill her, people shunned her. He had already isolated her from so many people. And so eventually, on one of their visitations after separation, he just didn't come back. And he took her 3 children to Antigua and kept them from her, but he would call her and he would taunt her. And he let her know regularly that this was what was going to happen. Prior to taking those children away, he would break into her home on a nightly basis and pace back and forth in her bedroom and pretend to kill her. And she knew every night when she went to bed that she might not wake up.
What an awful way to live, Michelle.
So there is 2 stages to escaping these situations, most times. So this first situation is I got to get to safety. I have to go stay with a safe family member, or I have to contact Safe Place. I have to get out of this situation and get me and my children to safety. But then there's this thing that follows it, and it's the court process, which is what you're familiar with. How does poverty impact a DV survivor's participation in the court system?
Well, it's huge. First of all, most people experience domestic violence in their home. And so sometimes they don't feel safe being in their home. But the information that officers take at the crime scene is your address, your phone number, and that's the information that gets forwarded on to the prosecutor's office for their witness lists to prepare for court. Now, if somebody leaves their home, that address no longer is any good. So when someone is attempting to provide a subpoena to a domestic violence survivor, first of all, they might not know where they're staying anymore if they're not staying at home.
Right.
Secondly, the offender, if not given a no contact order, may also be in that home. But another thing that is pretty common in a domestic violence situation is that phones get damaged. Or the offender knows that number and calls it consistently with either threats or pleas of love and forgiveness and just drop the charges and this will all be better.
Right.
So it's not uncommon that somebody either doesn't have access to their phone anymore or does not maintain the same number. So that right there are the 2 ways that nobody now knows how to find a survivor. Often that is seen as a survivor not wanting to participate in the criminal justice process because they've left messages and they haven't been returned, or I left a business card in their door. Well, even from the sexual assault cases that I handle, most people don't want to go back to the location of a traumatic event.
Absolutely.
So they often have to leave that behind and everything behind and start all over. And that is why the poverty levels increase for somebody when they leave a domestic abusive situation, but they're often connected through children. And so a relationship has to maintain. But those are 2 ways that we don't get access to people. And also, court is not always very efficient. And I don't think that that's a surprise to most people. But if a person has to come to court many times, people are often missing jobs that they don't always have vacation or sick time or the means to get paid for that time off that they're missing. And then when they have to go 3 or 4 or 5 times, you cannot be fired from a job for complying with the subpoena, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get paid for those hours that you go to court.
Yeah, and now I'm a woman who's trying to support children on my own, trying to put my life together, and I'm being dragged through the court by this abuser, and I'm missing time at work.
And you
I mean,
might
it makes
have to be
sense.
saving up money for the down payment, first and last month's rent. That's a lot of money all at once. Most of us have our next month's bills at best, no matter how much money any of us might be making. We don't usually have a large stash just to have on hand if you become a victim that needs to go to court.
Well, and especially in poverty. I know that, we've had women that were homeless or in situations, and then they have moved in with someone, and then that person ends up being an abuser, but it is that person's home. So there are lots of layers to this situation. Calhoun County has specialty courts, and they deal with specific targeted cases, one of which is a domestic violence court. Why do we have this domestic violence court, and why is it important to our community and service of the courts?
Well, Judge Tracy Tomac, when she took the bench in 2019, this was one of her goals, and she went across the state of Michigan trying to organize this domestic violence intervention court. Most people who participate in the criminal justice process as a domestic violence survivor are not as concerned about the criminal justice process. They just want the violence to stop.
Right.
Because we have to remember most of these relationships started from a position of love, or at least the survivor felt some love. And the whole goal of the domestic violence intervention court is to break that cycle. It is not uncommon that there has been a generational experience of domestic violence in either or both of the individuals' backgrounds. But it's also very important that you address all of the factors that go into that. There's often competing factors like substance abuse, mental health issues. All of those things need to be treated in order to have any ability to control the domestic violence response. And so different groups came together to respond to that, and it's a very intense court. It is a monthly contact, depending on what stage you're at, and soon next year it'll go to a bi-monthly contact. But there is a team of people designed to assess the needs of the individual offender and keep somebody on track to resolving those issues and working through the process to change the pattern of violence, change the behaviors that lead to the assaults.
Because this could be generational. This could be something that I've seen. This could, in fact, I have seen that and witnessed it, and I did repeat that in my own life a couple, 3-4 times. But this is something that I might have seen in my own home, that this was how things were handled. And so this intervention means so much more than just being penalized by the court. It's an intervention to help those families. I think that's amazing.
It is, and I'm
Please
sorry.
tell Judge Tomac that we're very happy that she's doing this for us and our community.
I think she's pleased at the opportunity that this community came together to make this happen. I'm sorry that you went through that, Teresa, but I guess I might add, did it take something else for you to see that some of these patterns were domestic violence rather than normal for someone to experience?
Sure. Growing up in it, you tend to think that it's the norm, right? Like there are just different social situations for families, and this was just the social situation of my family. I remember being a very young girl and knowing, gosh, my mom is crazy for putting up with this. But then you flash forward to, being in my 20s and entering into relationships myself, and I entered into the same kind of relationships I saw my mother in. It took till 30s or 40s to look at that and see there's a pattern here. I'm repeating the pattern of my mother. I think that oftentimes some of this stuff is generational, but I certainly don't think that it happens only to women who are poor. So thank you so much for joining us to discuss this myth and poverty. I think we're going to roll on the screen now some information about how a victim could contact someone at the court to go through the court process, and they could get help.
Thank you. I do want you to know that in the Battle Creek Police Department, they do have somebody from Safe Place embedded in their department, so they do have a contact directly there. The prosecutor's office also has a victim advocate at their office as well.
So now if the police go out on a domestic violence call, does this advocate go with them and respond in that call?
I don't believe so. I am not sure.
But they get connected to them after the call?
They can be connected and they're embedded directly as part of that team. They have an identified investigator by the name of Investigator Chapman, Joshua Chapman, and he works closely with this advocate who goes by the name of Melissa Smith. She also works for Safe Place, but she's embedded in the office, and they work jointly to address the issues. It is not uncommon that they often see the same people over a period of time.
We'll hope for a better day, right?
I think that there's always hope for a better day.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And thanks so much for joining us to talk about this very important topic in our community. And continue to join us as we're going to have future shows. All of our shows will look at different myths around poverty and how it relates to our community in Battle Creek. Thanks so much.